Okay, so you want to build a mobile dog grooming empire. Buy a van, install a hydro bath, drive to people's driveways, and get paid to make dogs smell nice. Here's the first number that should stop you before you go any further. Aussie Pet Mobile, the largest mobile pet grooming franchise in the world, with over 360 vans on the road across more than 65 franchise territories, reports an average territory grossing $721,254 a year. Sounds like a real empire. Now look at what the owner of that territory actually takes home, according to the company's own disclosure filing, somewhere between $100,976 and $129,826. Less than 18% of everything that territory billed actually reached the person who built it. That gap, between the impressive revenue number on the sign and the much smaller number that lands in the owner's account, is the entire story of this business. Understand it, and you understand mobile grooming. Miss it, and you can own a fleet of vans, a full appointment book, and a business that looks like a genuine empire from the outside, while quietly working harder for less than you did with one van and 80% of your own labor to keep. Let's talk about why this industry moves as much money as it does. The US pet grooming and boarding industry is worth $15.4 billion in 2026, spread across roughly 193,000 businesses. Mobile grooming is the fastest growing slice of it, on track to hit $2.4 to $2.8 billion, growing 12 to 15% a year, more than double the pace of the industry it sits inside. The drivers are simple: dual-income households with no weekend time, anxious dogs that struggle in a crowded salon, aging customers who can't easily load a dog into a car, and a generational shift toward treating pet care as a premium, non-negotiable expense. But here's the part that surprises almost everyone stepping into this business for the first time. Mobile grooming isn't really a grooming business. It's a single-asset logistics business. You're not really selling a haircut. You're selling a fully self-contained mobile salon that has to start every single morning, hold water pressure, run climate control, and show up on time, or the entire day's revenue simply doesn't happen. So before you spend a single dollar, you need to understand that not all mobile grooming revenue is the same business wearing a different hat. The solo owner-operator, running one van themselves, keeps close to 80% of every dollar the van bills, because there's no employee wage sitting between the revenue and the owner. The moment you hire a groomer to run a second van, that math flips hard. You're now netting somewhere around 30 to 40% of what that van bills, because you're paying a wage, covering their insurance, and absorbing the training and turnover risk that comes with someone else's hands doing the work. That's the entire mechanism behind the gap in the opening number. A multi-van territory isn't a bigger version of the solo business. It's a fundamentally different business, with a fundamentally worse margin per dollar of revenue, that only makes sense once you're running enough vans for the smaller percentage to add up to more total dollars than one owner working alone ever could. Now, what does it actually cost to get on the road? A lean, independent solo operation can launch for $25,000 to $50,000. A used van, basic grooming equipment, insurance, and initial marketing. A branded franchise like Aussie Pet Mobile requires a total investment of $167,000 to $208,000, including a franchise fee that has ranged from roughly $20,000 to $120,000, depending on territory and financing structure, plus the custom-built van itself, professional hydrobath and climate control systems, initial marketing, and working capital. Here's where that money actually goes inside the van. A proper mobile grooming build-out includes a water heating and pressure system, a generator sized to run climate control and equipment simultaneously, a professional-grade dryer and hydrobath setup, and enough insulation and ventilation to keep both the groomer and the dog safe in extreme weather. None of it optional, all of it required before the first appointment. Here's the trap inside the trap, and it's not the build-out cost. It's the fact that your entire business sits inside a single vehicle. In a stationary salon, if a dryer breaks, you move the dog to another station. In a mobile van, if the generator fails, the water pump seizes, or the transmission gives out on the way to your first appointment, you don't lose one appointment. You lose the entire day's revenue, every single booking on that route, with a same-day cancellation that most customers won't reschedule for a week or more. Experienced operators set aside 3 to 4% of annual revenue specifically as an equipment reserve for exactly this reason. And by year 5, most operators will need to replace at least one major system on the van. Skip that reserve, treat a breakdown as a surprise instead of an inevitability, and a single bad month of van repairs can wipe out most of a solo operator's annual margin in one stretch of missed appointments. Now you need to understand the legal and structural landscape this business actually operates inside, and it's genuinely unusual compared to most trades. Unlike plumbing or electrical work, most US states have no license requirement at all to work as a professional dog groomer. Anyone can legally open a grooming business with zero state-mandated training. That sounds like it makes this business easy to enter, and it does. It also means your only real barrier to entry against competitors is reputation, insurance, and the quality of your actual work, because there's no regulatory wall keeping undercapitalized competitors out the way there is in a licensed trade. Where the real structure lives is in franchise law. The FTC's franchise rule requires every franchisor to give you a franchise disclosure document, the same document that revealed the $721,254 to $100,976 gap in this video's opening. And buried inside every one of those agreements are territory rights and termination clauses that determine whether the empire you're building is actually yours or is built entirely on a relationship the franchisor can end. Now, here's a real company, a real name, and a real collapse, because nothing teaches this lesson better than watching it happen to an operator who did exactly what this video is describing. Meet JLET Enterprises. Founded in 2016 by Joseph and Lynette Norton, the company spent nearly a decade building a genuine multi-brand pet care operation across Naples and Sarasota, Florida, operating as Lucy's Dog Bakery and Spa, 3 Dog Bakery and Grooming, and a franchise support entity called Diversified Services SWF. This wasn't a single struggling van. This was a real, multi-location, multi-brand pet care business. Exactly the kind of empire this video's title describes, built over 10 years by real operators who'd clearly figured out how to run the grooming side of the business. In May of 2025, the franchisor terminated JLET's franchise agreement following a legal dispute. On January 15, 2026, JLET Enterprises filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the Middle District of Florida under Subchapter 5, the streamlined process built for small businesses. So how does a 10-year multi-location pet care operator in an industry where American pet spending just hit a record $158 billion end up in bankruptcy court? The answer isn't that the grooming was bad or that demand disappeared. Pet spending in their home state and nationally was growing the entire time. The answer is structural. JLET built its empire on a franchise relationship, and when that relationship broke down in litigation, the franchise termination itself became the event that triggered the collapse. Not a bad quarter of appointments, not a van breakdown, not a hiring problem. The exact same legal document that gave the business its brand, its territory, and its customer trust also gave the franchisor the power to take all 3 away. It's the exact same risk sitting inside any franchise-based mobile grooming empire. The skill, the reputation, and the 10 years of customer relationships you build can all survive intact, while the legal agreement underneath the brand name on your van collapses for reasons that have nothing to do with how well you groom a dog. So who actually wins in this business? Almost never the operator who scales into hired employees and additional vans before they've mastered the solo economics of a single route, because every added van dilutes the owner's percentage take before it adds meaningful absolute dollars. It's the operators disciplined enough to fund a real equipment reserve instead of treating every dollar of revenue as spendable profit, because in a single vehicle business, deferred maintenance isn't a savings, it's a future full-day cancellation waiting to happen. It's the operators who read their franchise agreement's territory and termination clauses as carefully as they'd read a lease, understanding exactly what happens to the business they built the moment that relationship changes. And it's the operators who diversify into dog walking, pet sitting, and overnight care alongside grooming, building recurring cross-sold relationships instead of one-off transactional bookings. Because a customer who only ever books a single grooming appointment is far easier to lose to a competitor than one who trusts you with 3 different services. Now let's run the numbers 2 ways, using the same real territory from the opening, because seeing them side by side is more convincing than any warning I could give you. The optimistic scenario. You're running a mature, multi-van, Aussie pet mobile-style territory, doing that same $721,254 in annual revenue. You've funded your equipment reserve properly, kept groomer turnover low through fair, above-market pay, cross-sold walking, and sitting alongside grooming, and stayed in good standing with your franchisor with years left on your territory agreement. Landing in the top quartile of the system's own disclosed performance range, that's a genuinely strong outcome. An owner take-home well above the system average, for a business with real staff, real routes, and real recurring customers. The realistic scenario. A van's transmission fails during your busiest month, costing 2 weeks of a full route's revenue while it's in the shop. A groomer quits mid-season, and you're paying overtime and referral fees to cover the route while you rehire. And a territory dispute with a neighboring franchisee drags into a slow-moving disagreement with the franchisor that eats months of goodwill and legal attention you didn't budget for. Run that same $721,254 in revenue through that reality, and your take-home doesn't land near the top of the range. It lands at or below that $100,976 floor, while the vans, from the outside, still look exactly as busy and exactly as successful as they did the year everything went right. So is building a mobile dog grooming empire worth it? It offers something genuinely rare in small business, a fast-growing, recession-resistant category, real customer demand, and a path to ownership that doesn't require a license, a decade of apprenticeship, or hundreds of thousands in real estate. But it demands an owner who understands that scaling from one van to a fleet isn't scaling the same business bigger. It's trading a business where you keep 80 cents of every dollar for one where you keep 30, in exchange for hoping the total dollar amount works out ahead anyway. It demands treating equipment reserves as mandatory, not optional, in a business where the entire operation lives inside a single vehicle. And it demands reading the franchise agreement underneath your brand as carefully as the operators at JLET Enterprises wish. In hindsight, they had. Every number in this script, the $721,254 territory that nets less than a fifth of that to its owner, the equipment reserve most solo operators skip, the franchise termination clause that ended a 10-year business without a single bad grooming appointment, exists for one reason. It filters out the people who wanted to build an empire from the people who understood exactly what they were signing when they agreed to build it inside someone else's brand. The van, the hydrobath, and the customer list are the easy part. What separates the operator still thriving in year 10 from the one filing Chapter 11 under a brand name that isn't theirs anymore was never how well they groomed the dog. It was whether they understood exactly whose business they were actually building.